of practice is focused on, and really this idea of building policies. We want to make sure that when thinking about policy development or any sort of practices related to implementing AI in government, but really anywhere, that they're being done in a way that is responsible. So designing, building, and deploying them throughout that entire life cycle in a way that's fair and impacts people in a positive way, with mitigating any sort of harm or consequences that could come from those systems. So through this discussion, I will share a bit of my background and how that might be relevant to some of the work that you're going to be doing. I do want to make sure that this is relevant for you, though. So I will try and keep an eye on the chat or any of the questions that come. Maybe just raise your hand if you have them, since I can't see people, so it's difficult to know. So if you could do that, then I'd be more than happy to be interrupted through the presentation and just answer anything there. If not, you might have seen that I have the presentation online, and so there's quite a bit of content in it. So I'm happy to kind of keep talking at more length, but again, really want to make this something that is meaningful for you. So I will make sure that we have time for Q&A at the end, but as I said, please just feel free to stop me at any point in time. So why I was happy to speak to you today is my background's really in government. So now that I'm at the Responsible AI Institute, we are a nonprofit organization. But prior to that, and to some degree, we focus on public sector, but it is broader than that. So really, this is my first foray outside of public sector since I started working in general. But my background really started in municipal government, and actually I worked at provincial government during university, but I didn't include that on here because it's not part of my workplace. But I do understand that I guess it's relevant for this because I do understand that distinction between the local and then state, or in my case, provincial context, and then the federal context, where, as you can see, I eventually went to work. So with that, starting in 2008, I had the opportunity to work on two campaigns, one in Canada and one in the US. And so I really got to see the difference between what we were working on in thinking about how to get people organized and thinking about various different concerns with society and how that then plays into an election cycle. And I had the fortune of being just a community organizer on the first Obama campaign, and in that got to see how data can really help to drive decisions, which we all know and understand now. But at the time, it was really quite novel. And there was that stark contrast for me in terms of the campaign that we were running in Alberta, the province where we were running this campaign, and then what was being done, which I know has been well documented now during that first Obama campaign. And so really just understanding more about the people that you're working with, and also in some cases targeting. Now I understand some of the concerns that could also be raised because of things like that. So I share this because this was really my first foray into trying to match the concepts that I was interested in. So democracy and getting people more involved and interested in government and having their say in what governance can do. My background's in political science and economics from an academic standpoint. And so that was really driving me. And then I realized, having that experience, that the technologies or underlying context in which we're operating in now really has an impact on those potential outcomes. And so similarly, when I came back from that campaign, I am from Edmonton, and I went to go work for the city. And I was initially working for city councilors and writing speeches on various different initiatives that they were supporting, including things like often what happens at the local level, for any of you that have worked there, there's lots of grants and contributions, things like a grant for like a match grant for a playground development. And one of the things that I could never understand was why there were so many different databases for a few grants and contribution programs that we had. The city itself only hired or employed 12,500 people at the time. And so to have data kind of all over the place was, especially again, coming from that campaign where things were quite organized, was incredibly confusing for me. And I needed that data. I guess I should have said that part of the story, because even when you're writing a speech, you want to be able to know who are we providing this grant to, how much was it for, what were the reasons why they got chosen, because you kind of want to make this speech a bit more special. And so even in that, it's quite interesting how we don't think about it, but we really use data everywhere. And so that became a really strong understanding for me. And then again, when thinking about other aspects of how the bureaucracy or how a government functions, I started to ask a lot of questions, probably incredibly annoying. However, one of the individuals in the executive branch, so the chief information officer, was really thinking about a lot of these same things. And so the chief information officer at the time became kind of a cowboy, as he appreciated that moniker, because he was really trying to think about now a lot of these conversations we're having around how to increase or create a more digital government. And so in doing so, the city of Edmonton became the first city in Canada to move to Google for mail and calendar, which created a lot of cultural challenges and changes. And this for me was quite important lesson, again, early on in my career, to be able to really understand the impact that tools and technology and the inputs into them have on not only decision making, but also on things like policy development or how we're providing services. And it also was really formative for that time, because working with somebody like a CIO and at that level, you really get to see how corporate governance works. And so one of the projects that I was when I kept asking about a lot of data, you can imagine that then I also wanted to know how the public was seeing that and how that related to having a more transparent government. And so then the city of Edmonton became the fourth city in Canada to launch an open data portal. And it became really comprehensive. And we actually worked with a California company to design it in a way that the citizens could understand not only the data that was in there through visualizations, but connect that also to the city's goals and objectives that they might not have even known about, because they're just things that are talked about kind of in city council. So that was, again, a really, really interesting way for me to understand the power that data could have when used appropriately. But also I saw a lot of the gaps and challenges with that. So with this work, I got asked to do a secondment and go to the federal government and start their open government portal. And in that, it was an interesting time. Canada had just joined the Open Government Partnership. And so it was really in the formative stages of thinking about how they were going to do it. And at the time, the Prime Minister was really not known for a lot of candor. And so it was a challenging time to really be thinking about this while there was a lot of criticism from even internally. Scientists were very public, federal government scientists were very public about not being able to display their research to the extent that they had been through previous administrations. So also got to see that kind of impact that politics can have. For whatever reason, that administration was very supportive of putting an open government portal out there. And so we got to actually build it. And that ended up changing to the administration that we still have. And for those of you that follow Canadian politics, know that transparency was a really big agenda for the Trudeau government. And in fact, in doing so, what I think that's important to this conversation we'll have today is it was the first government that really thought about publicly releasing mandate letters of what they expect from the various different ministers. And in that had a results dashboard that then demonstrated this is how the government's doing. And so if you're wondering why I'm talking so much about data, for those of you that are really familiar with AI systems, data is really the underpinning or one of the most underpinning components of AI systems. And also, it's really important to think about the context in which they're being used in. And because, as all of you will know, governments, people try and think of it as just like one sector, but it transcends so many different sectors. And so really thinking about all of these different contexts in how these technologies are being used, what is feeding the technologies in order to have those different outcomes, all of that experience that I had was really quite relevant and, as I said, informed a lot of the work that I'm doing now, which I'll get into what we're doing with the Responsible AI Institute in a moment. But just to situate, one of the key challenges, again, you're on an AI working group, so I don't need to get into the impact that AI will have. But why I think that this slide's relevant is just to say that there's a lot of these big numbers that are thrown around and questions about where AI is being used and who's going to kind of be the AI champion country-wise and the dominance of it. But what it doesn't tell is, I think what the most important thing is that it is becoming more and more ubiquitous. And even when we talk about artificial intelligence, we don't know necessarily what that means. And for me, I am not really interested in defining artificial intelligence. I think that especially when we're thinking about this from a policy perspective, it's really important to go with where people are in their thinking around all of these things. And so I think of AI as a socio-technology that has these different types of inputs from these data components, like I was mentioning. And so any technology that has those inputs, especially ones that have learning components, fit into that definition for me, and therefore I think need policy structure around them. That said, I completely understand that policies need to be measurable and you need to put some scope around it, so I can speak to how we manage that in the Government of Canada context. But just really getting to the point that AI systems are completely ubiquitous and becoming more and more prolific, and we really need to understand then those policy measures. So in the Government of Canada, where I started with a lot of this work that I'm doing now within the Responsible AI Institute, we call RAI for short, so I'll just start using that. So the work that we're doing with RAI right now is really thinking about broadly, how do we work with government, industry, academia, civil society to put safeguards around these different types of tools and systems, and not just focus on those negative aspects. And so in the, as I said, I've been informed to do this work from then what I did in Canada. So I'll walk through that now in terms of some of those opportunities and the kind of positive benefits that we see from the use of AI systems. So in the top left, really what that's getting at is a lot of the benefits modernization that we were working on and integrating, and this is really Economic Social Development Canada, not my project specifically, but we worked with that team again when really trying to think about the implications that those systems might have for people that are receiving those benefits. And that could be anything from privacy concerns, or it could be things like accuracy of those systems. And so within this benefits modernization, because AI companies are getting a lot more adept at thinking about things that they can do to improve that service delivery or that tool to improve that service delivery, then these components of what we think of as AI, like data analytics, or again, kind of even some machine learning components, are being integrated in or bundled in. And so we saw that be the case with the benefits modernization. So in that regard, one of the things that we thought was it's really positive. There was a huge backlog. There was also this system was really the current system was dependent on really old mainframe servers that people weren't learning these skills in school anymore to maintain. So something needed to happen. But really, it wasn't just a direct translation. And so that's why we had to work with the department, trying to get them to understand the potential, well, yes, the opportunities, but the potential challenges that that could have. Similarly, some of the other great ways that we saw AI starting to be experimented with and used was within Canadian Pacific Rail. And what they did was put monitors in the train to try and understand when there would be component issues, so like the wheels or on the tracks. And that would then really limit any sort of derailments, which had been significant problems historically for us. There was a pilot that was done during tax season in 2019, which was actually helping people to get better access to information via a chatbot. And what was interesting about this is that it wasn't actually an AI system. We think like all chatbots might be, but there was nothing that was adaptive. It was all just data that was from the website on the website. And then the chatbot just made it easier for people to be able to consume that information. And then just from a program perspective, there was lots of start to use, and actually I shouldn't say start because it had been done for quite some time from just a data analytics perspective, is thinking about the use of AI when helping to look at underlying causes for certain systemic challenges. And so suicide prevention was something that's a huge priority for the federal government, I'm sure, in some aspects of your government as well. And so one of the things that they started to use AI systems for was to really look at what those root causes were. So again, we're really trying to balance in all the stuff we do, these positive attributes and potential opportunities, but really make sure that it's being done with implementing them in a way that there's these safeguards. And the reason for that really, and I'm not sure if a similar survey has been done in California, but this, to be fair, is 2018. However, I still sit on a committee with the federal government that we have really similar results now in 2021, that there's really diminishing public trust for the use of these systems. And there's a big survey, and this is online, so happy to share that link with you. But I particularly liked this one graphic because it was this realization for us. We were building all of this in 2018. And so at the time, this was coming out, and it was a realization for us that the more that these systems could impact us, the greater concern that they have. And as much as like, that seems obvious, the discussions at the time were trying to put certain types of guardrails over things that just didn't have, I guess we missed the mark in thinking that people were really concerned about robots replacing their jobs, or whether or not they would get access to a certain type of position. So this was a really helpful survey for us that helped to inform our thinking around a lot of the work that we did eventually to create a policy, which I'm coming to in a moment. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm sure you've all read the news and are aware of the concerns, but some of the things that we were seeing at the time, and I still continue to be concerned with, is things like predictive policing, things like automated health decisioning, and so whether that be in prediction or whether that just be who gets access to better patient care is something that's concerning. And then also we are seeing more use of biometrics. I'm sure that many of you read recently about what Lemonade has been doing in the insurance world. And so this is something where when taking that and thinking about how to really help children in a classroom, because you're understanding their behavior via facial recognition, or other types of biometric attributes is a bit concerning, especially just given where the understanding of the science is currently. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, this concern about potential job loss or job replacement is something that we were really then alerted to being a big concern. So what we did to respond to that initially was to draft a white paper that had, one of the things, again, building off of the experience that I had earlier, really thinking about how we can do this in the most transparent way, was both build a white paper in the open, but also this policy work. And so recognizing that we were a small team, while we had background in data architecture, law, and in ethics, we didn't know everything about all of these different orientations of AI and the potential impact that they have. And so the white paper really helped us to think through the government's use of AI systems, but also to use that as an opportunity to get feedback both from our peers in our various different government departments, but also industry and academia to really provide their input into these are the different types of things we should be thinking about. So that drove then this policy that we created. We drafted it, and then also, again, really adhering to those tenets of being open and transparent, made sure that we had ample time to get consultation and feedback from the public. And again, our peers in the departments that were going to have to adhere to this policy. And as I mentioned earlier, how we resolved that scope issue is that we really then, by doing that white paper, had a good sense of how these different types of systems were being used. And as a result, then identified that, and even in some of the examples that I gave earlier, for the most part, they were really automated decision-making systems. And those were, quite frankly, the ones that we had the most questions about. The monitors and the train, it's great. Anything that can be done to improve a derailment, that's good. The ones that are making determinations on who gets access to a certain type of benefit, that becomes a lot more questionable. And so one of the things that we really wanted to think about in this context was what are the different, I keep saying safeguards or guardrails, what are those components that we can put into a policy that all types of these AI systems would have to adhere to. And so the 9 requirements that you see on the side are ultimately where we landed based on, again, all of that research that had been done through the white paper, and then also the collective feedback that we got through this open policy development process. And so I won't go through all of them. Most of them will be familiar to you if you're familiar with the topic of responsible AI or ethical AI, and what should and shouldn't be addressed, or what should be addressed. What I will say, though, is that for those of you that do work already on technology policy or even communications policy, one of the things that was a big concern when we were implementing this from departments is that they were like, oh no, another policy. And we have so many questions about how we are going to actually comply with this, and those are fair, and I will come to that in a moment. But they were also like, well, we don't want to have to do more work. We're trying to be innovative. And what you'll see from this list, really, other than when we look at this, I should mention, and I'll get to it on the next slide, really thought about the risk of a system. So only in high-risk systems was approval to operate the system, putting more constraints on what they would normally have had for approval. And then also things like peer review, again, kind of in those more higher risk systems, were we requiring something that was a net new to what was already in existing technology or communications policy. And so things like contingency planning or notification or explanation, these were things.
Hi, this is Jan.
Hi, yeah.
Hey, Janet, Keith here.
Hold on, I'm just hi. I just put myself on mute.
Okay.
Oh, okay, can you hear me?
Okay, so if there isn't a question, I'll move forward.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is that we'll address all the questions at the end, so that way it's we are not recording the question and answer, and the audience is more comfortable asking questions. So
Sure, not a problem. So with this, as I was saying, there were a lot of these things that were already in existing policies. And so that is something that, again, if you're thinking about how to develop one of these policies, really look to what's the objective of what you're trying to achieve. And those might be in technology or enterprise architecture policies. And as I said, we found that some of these requirements were actually in communications, like the accessibility policies were already there. And so, as I mentioned, we really thought about these things in terms of risk. And so what we did, we wanted to not treat all of those requirements the same and just put these blanket requirements over everything. And so what we did in order to figure that out was develop this algorithmic impact assessment, which again, via feedback that we got from the community, was really emerging as a best practice. And so in that, it asks questions, it still exists, about the type of system, about how it's being used, the context in which it's being used in, the data inputs, etc. And then it evaluates a certain type of risk. And then those 9 requirements that you saw on the previous slide really scale to fit to that. And so in that context, one of the things, sorry, I moved too quickly. Oops. I thought I had a risk slide after, apologies. So in that, the assessment draws out risks from 1 to 4, and so 1 being low, 4 being high. And so as you can see, these 9 requirements in Annex C of the directive, which is available online, you can see how we tried to scale them. That said, and that takes me to this, is that just that proliferation of AI systems, like I talked about earlier on, was really becoming a challenge for us. And so this idea of AI being everywhere and all of these different companies actually that are providing certain services either via vendor relationship or a partnership with the government, or governments just building their own, often learning from the experience that we're seeing in industry, is really identifying that all of these technology, or all of these different types of businesses or areas of business are being enabled by technology. And so these are just 2 examples that I think surprised me, at least, so I like to share. Like how much AI is being used in mining to be able to find and also then just limit the extraction area that they have. So again, like really positive attributes of this. Also a ton of robotics to improve safety conditions where people might have been more in dangerous situations. But then also things in like air conditioning. And so just sometimes you randomly meet people, and I was on a flight one time and met somebody, so this is a while ago, and met someone who runs an HVAC system, HVAC company, and he was telling me about how all of the industry is really having some thoughts right now on the future, and similar to what I was saying earlier about mainframe systems and the benefits modernization that was required. I guess that they can't get skilled workforce to either be interested, or there's really a lot of people that are, there's a ton of turnaround on their skilled labor. And so as a result, they're using a lot more monitors in buildings to make better determinations about when HVAC systems need to be updated. But also this company, Brainbox, they actually try and really think about it in terms of thinking about it in a more climate friendly way to understand like when air conditioning and heat needs to be used based on those various different circumstances. So it's a little bit more adaptive. So again, just kind of fun examples, but the idea really is that even I work in this and I do this all the time. And it really surprises me where some of these systems are being used. And so because of that, just to tie it back to the policy piece, where I was going with that is that it's really important to recognize that there's different risks associated with different types of systems. And so having that scaled policy was really, really helpful for us to then make sure that we were allowing for innovation and recognizing that there was these positive opportunities as per earlier, but we were still putting those appropriate safeguards in place for systems that were higher risk. And so some of the things that we are concerned about as it relates to AI systems and these issues that I'm raising are really kind of indicated here. We do have a map on our website. It used to be called Where AI has Gone Wrong, and I think I liked that better, but I think I don't remember what it's called now, and I apologize. But if you go into responsible.ai, and actually, I think Rady from my team is on the call. Rady, if you could put the link to the programs and tools page with the map, that would be great into the chat. So with that, we've been really trying to track a variety of different use cases. And as I said, initially our thought around this was where AI has gone wrong. The reason why we're clearly struggling, I'm struggling with the name, is because we wanted to also recognize when these issues have been identified in AI systems, that there's been some remediation of that. So you'll see on the map itself, it's interactive. You can see by industry, but also it says allows you to toggle between helpful and harmful cases. And so you can see where we got a lot of the different concerns that I've listed here on this slide in those use cases, but also just know that that's also where we're really trying to learn from best practices to integrate into some of the broader policy work that we're continuing to do. So with the lessons learned that I had from the Government of Canada, but also just, again, kind of what I'm seeing and we're all seeing in the broader community and ecosystem, this is where we have really tried to articulate the major concerns. And so whether that be things like misdiagnosis or harm to particular populations, especially minority populations, and harm doesn't need to be, when I say that, I can mean it in the most subtle sense. So it could be lack of access to credit. It could be not being recommended for a job. And that could be because, again, there's a facial recognition system that's helping to filter out video interviews, and they're not recognizing people with color or people with disabilities in the same way that they do others. So these are the things that we're really trying to not only document through this use case map, but also, as I said, that's really beyond the experience that I had in the government context, feeding what we're focused on right now. And so I don't think that I need to, from this, I'm sure all of you, and especially considering that you work in the public sector and are part of this AI community, already can understand why we need responsible AI. But just again, coupled with this lack of trust in these systems, we don't have clear regulations that are in place. And as a result, there's confusion on what to do. Companies are coming forward and saying that they are okay to self-regulate. And I'm not sure if any of you were involved with the California Consumer Protection Act, but things like that really are helpful to try and draw the industry into a particular direction. And so we do feel like clear regulation that is scalable and understands that context, of course, is important to drive the outcomes that we'd like to see from these companies. And the two more just very brief examples here are the A levels in the UK. I'm not sure if anybody followed this, but I think it's a good government example where the government because of COVID, needed to do online testing. And for whatever reason, their algorithm indicated that people who were in coming from schools in poorer districts were graded significantly lower than their previous scores, but also than peers in districts with more financial means. And so there were protests, and what's interesting is because it impacted a population that is a lot more digitally savvy and understood the implications, they automatically recognized that this was a problem with the algorithm, and that decisioning was impacting them personally. And so I think it's just we're going to see more and more of these use cases. And as I just mentioned quickly with things like Lemonade, there's more outcry from the public because they are recognizing that that's the cause of these issues. And one that I'm just particularly concerned about is a lot of, and it's not just Robinhood, but there's a lot of trading that's been done in smaller quantities and with a lot less limited access. So through applications like Robinhood. And I think the concept of democratizing trading is incredible. Again, without these guardrails, policies, regulations in place, then they're a good concept then could go completely wrong. And so what happened, for those of you that aren't aware, is that there's been various different complaints, hundreds of complaints to both the SEC and the FTC in terms of how, at the federal level, how these trading applications are working, but specifically against Robinhood because they were gamifying the entire experience. And so when you did a trade, there's confetti, and it also didn't have appropriate training requirements that traders do need for more complex trades. And so as a result, many people that didn't have that background lost a lot of money, and ultimately led to a kid committing suicide, which is incredibly tragic. So you see the implications that this potentially has when these things occur. So it's definitely a real concern. And when we're talking about responsible and the need for this, it's not something that's just needs to be, there's lots of conversations around like ethics washing in the same way that we talk about that for the environment or other types of concerns. They're real challenges. And the more that we can do this in a proactive way, then the better off we'll be in designing and deploying these systems. So what the response has been to a lot of this work has been from international organizations, state and local governments, to really think through what their various different outcomes that they'd like to see from these AI systems are. In most circumstances, it's been very much at this high level of just recognizing, like I said, AI is the socio-technology, and it needs to not harm people. It needs to be designed in a way that is respectful, and a lot of these things are super high level. And when you go into the implementation phase of even policy development, like I did, you get a lot of questions about like, what does that actually mean? And so for that, so now just transitioning to what we do within the Responsible AI Institute is we really, I was concerned being in that position where I'm trying to implement these broad concepts, and a lot of the practitioners were like, okay, well, just tell us what we actually need to do. And so in that, did a mapping like a whole bunch of other organizations have been doing and thinking about, in terms of, okay, what do these various different policies and standards mean? What's the implication that they have? And that led us to also reviewing then what the broader landscape is. And so what based on that plethora of research that I was showing on the previous slides, what can we learn from that and how can it get adopted? And in that, I became really curious about this idea of like think tanks and do tanks, and how do we build off of that research and build measurable policies and tools. And so we like to think that we ground this, ultimately we have to have some sort of ground truth. And so the principles that we've chosen to adhere our concepts to are the OECD principles. I think that they're the most comprehensive in nature, but again, they do leave a lot of questions for how do we actually implement this. But it is important to have some sort of ground truth when thinking about, okay, what are we trying to achieve, and how do we help to prioritize potential trade-offs that we might have. And so I think that the OECD principles really help us to ground that work. So all of that mapping that I talked about on the previous slide, or previous slides, and all that research really culminated in then an effort to distill that into 5 key dimensions. And so again, it was really helpful to have an opportunity to kind of do this for the second time and also not do it in the context of just the Government of Canada, because grounding it in something like the OECD principles, you're really thinking quite globally, but also it allows you to build off of this incredible canon of research that was developed and is continuing to really be developed. But we wanted to get into like not only what it is, and so creating this, that mapping, we were able to kind of have a common set of dimensions that we say, okay, this is at least our definition of responsible AI that helps us to achieve those objectives within the OECD principles. And so I think it's important to go through what we include in here. So we really look at that from the perspective of accountability, and I've been talking a lot about guardrails, but that idea of having appropriate governance in place, knowing who's making decisions, the impact that that has, that's really in that accountability component. When we talk about human in the loop, which is a phrase that's often talked about, accountability fits into that. Robustness, thinking about accuracy of the system, data drift, model drift, etc. Security components, we fit into our definition of robustness. It's not everyone's definition of robustness, but I think security needs to go somewhere. So, and one of the important things that I should say when doing this work that I think is important to think about is that similar to kind of what I was saying with when creating the policy, there's other policies that a lot of that this work is already being identified as being part of. And so that what's really important about that is that we're not trying to reinvent anything with this. We're trying to, similar to what I did in the policy context, in the Canadian context, sorry, is really think about just where we reference existing work that's being done. So that's why not drawing out a specific section on security, because that is something that there's a lot of really incredible work already around security, cybersecurity, etc. Similarly for privacy, like I mentioned with CCPA earlier, we're not trying to reinvent saying new privacy measures with this. It's really referencing existing privacy policy. And that would fall into a component of data quality and rights. But that's also looking at data lineage, again, the data inputs that I spent so much time talking about earlier, as you can imagine, is a big aspect of this work for us. And then also what you hear about most, really, I think, when thinking about the ethics or responsibility of these systems is that can we explain what the system is? It's just a black box. How do we know how it's making those decisions? And then also bias and fairness. And so I've talked a lot about that aspect through some of the use cases as I spoke about early on. And so our response to all of this has really been to create a certification program. And so drawing from the experience that I had in the federal government, really allowed me to be able to think about different types of ways that things like standards and best practices, like accounting principles and procedures, for example, really augment those private or the public governance being that regulation, policy, etc. And so I became really interested in these private governance opportunities, and as a result, thought that the best way to approach responding to these challenges would be through the development of a private certification that really complemented the tenets within public policy. And so the model that we've created to do this is to, again, I have a very similar pattern to things, but really I think there's a lot of value in bringing the community together, recognizing that we're not subject matter experts in absolutely everything that we do, and especially with the scope of AI systems. So getting feedback on the framework that we've created, and then working with an accreditation body. So ANAB in the US context, we've had conversations with to actually develop this accreditation. And then that's a service that auditors would provide. And ultimately then our certification work would be part of that. And so this is a really similar model to something like LEED that you're probably familiar with for sustainable building development. That is where we're really looking to go with this. And so what we've done is building off of those 5 dimensions that we talked about earlier, build that into then a trust index or an indices, so questions and answers, and you can see on the right-hand side that's been built out into an actual tool, because it's hard to kind of go through all of these things. So we've built out this tool to make it a bit easier. What we've done is, it's important for me that this remains an open source tool and is something that organizations can use as they're starting to think about all of these issues. But we also recognize that we really need to get into more nuanced discussions. And that's, again, something that I learned from the Canadian work, is that even when you're talking about peer review, you need to know who your impacted audience is, invite them to the table as part of that conversation, make sure your lawyer is there, make sure communications people are there, the program manager and the people that are building those technologies, and you're making those decisions in tandem with one another. But to get to that degree of best practice or standard is really quite context specific. And so that's the work that we're trying to get into now with the Responsible AI certification mark. We are doing this in partnership with the World Economic Forum, and we're building off of various different work that's already been out there. So things like Google's What If tool or IBM 360 Fairness Toolkit are really a lot of foundational research that's been helping drive the entire AI audit community around how to define and research, really, I should mention that as well, that comes from a lot of incredible institutes on really defining what does fairness mean, how do we actually measure this in a mathematical way. So that's really important for us. And then these concepts, as you can see, have been derived by a lot of international organizations and existing federal government work. I should mention that in addition to the partnership that we have with the World Economic Forum, I do sit on various different standards bodies and some of these international organizations, including the OECD. So how this has worked, and I'm cognizant of times that I will make sure that you have ample time to ask questions, but just to give you a sense of then actually putting this into practice, because you might say, like, this sounds great, but like, does it actually work? A lot of what we've seen when using this with organizations with real use cases is that they're improving their governance. They are identifying, we're working right now with the US Department of Defense, and one of the big challenges that's raised is the need for training. So you can put all of these policies in place, you can have governance, but you need to train your workforce in order to even be able to do the appropriate analysis. There was just a workshop this morning with industry actually on this initiative, and they were asking that question, like, who is going to be doing this analysis, and do they have the appropriate training? So really thinking about what those future skills are and how to integrate that is something that at a minimum we're flagging when thinking, when going through this work that we've made with this responsible AI assessment. Also, again, really confronting some of the challenges we see related to bias and fairness in particular organizations. This specific example is for automated colon cancer screening. One of the things that we saw were just, again, this could relate to accuracy or it could relate to data input, but just the identification of different samples. And so, and actually what's super interesting about this is that recently Google has launched a cancer screening application, which they've said is not a medical tool, and it's just being debuted or piloted in Europe, but it was only trained on data that had 4% of the population that they trained it on, was people of color. And so it's just, with these types of things, then you can't, if that's the training data that it's working from, then you can't imagine that it's going to be accurate on the entire population. And so these were things that we also saw similarly in this application. So again, this stuff is up so you can kind of read through these things. So I've kind of spoken to the need for data and really good data quality throughout. There's really great work that was done building off of, honestly, a lot of data standards work that the data community's been working with for a long time, but to put it into like an easy to understand way, and also thinking about some of the context specific concerns. Data sheets for data sets is a really good document to kind of work through. We work with Data Nutrition Project, which is a nonprofit organization that's working to create data labels for different types of data sets, like well-used data sets, and have alerts associated with it, really identifying things like, for example, with this use case with automated triage of claims, this was for insurance, that you're not over-indexing on one population versus another, especially if your training data wasn't fit for purpose. So if you were training this system on people in Ohio, but then you're applying it in California, the population is quite different. And so things like that, these different types of tools like data sheets for data sets or Data Nutrition Project are really thinking about, and therefore we've incorporated into our broader assessment, but just important attribution to that work that's been done. And so with that, again, kind of I spoke about the need for explainability of these systems. One of the reasons, and I guess this is an important point, is often there's lots of questions on like, how do these machines make decisions, and should we allow these black boxes? And again, it really depends on the type of system, at least in my opinion. In many circumstances, we've seen that we often don't know why humans are making those decisions. And so interpretability, so post observation of like how that machine arrived at that position is also, or could be useful. And so we might not always know exactly how, but that's maybe an unfair expectation. And so just something to be concerned about because there could be potential benefits for use of these systems. So I will just kind of go through these certification pieces really quickly because I think it's probably less interesting to you. But again, the same kind of work that we're thinking about in looking at it from a private governance perspective really can and should apply in a public sector context as well. Although I think it might be a bit duplicative of what I spoke about earlier on. So really, when we're thinking about the scope, as I mentioned earlier, for me, in a private governance perspective, it doesn't matter because it's a self certification. So whoever wants to come on will do that. But then the idea is that it's not duplicating other types of evaluations like I've spoken to. And our really key audiences for this are going to be companies that are committed to responsible AI, but then also government procurement. So that's the project we're working on with Department of Defense. So really thinking about how do you apply this to when you're acquiring AI systems within your organization. So that might be something that you're thinking about already in the state context as well. And while we are concerned about the end consumer, we're really concerned about that, or what we're really focusing on right now are these small and medium-sized businesses that often don't have the resources or the skill set to be able to build these systems in that responsible and ethical manner. And then also just working with regulators directly so that, again, there's a nice cadence between this is what the expectation is from the public sector, and then here's some of the work that we're doing to adhere to that from that private side. And a good example of this is what's happening in the EU context right now. So there's the European Union has a proposed AI Act, and in it, it really speaks to the need for conformity assessments. And so when we're talking about certification marks, it's a conformity assessment or a schema against that. And so you can see how they can then develop a big, broader policy at that EU level, at a government level, and then really rely on things like these private standards or certifications to demonstrate adherence or compliance with that policy. Just going to move through this. I was talking to that. So again, this applies in a policy context as well, but how we're thinking about this certification, and this should not come as a surprise based on everything that I just said previously, is that we really need to be comprehensive about the what goes in that policy. So really looking at it from the perspective of data, models, and context. And so within those various different inputs that are going into the model, that context and that data, then we've created those questions that I was talking about earlier with the index against those various different categories. And the key concern that we have, and again, as a state government that's operating in many different regions and many different sectors, there's probably going to be domain and regional nuances, in addition to nuances that are going to come from different types of systems. So even as we've talked about, whether it be monitors in the road or prediction systems or chatbots, these are all different types of AI, and on their own have different types of implications, whether that's because of how they learn, how they adapt, whatever the circumstances. It's something that we want to take into account when we are developing this assessment work. And so finally, we recognize that we're part of a broader responsible AI ecosystem. So you saw that very beautiful diagram earlier. That is really that was my effort to just try and understand that ecosystem and who the different players are, from everything like conferences where a lot of people go to get really good information and lots of good research is shared, to government organizations and the role that they play. We, as I was mentioning in some of the earlier slides, really want to build from that research, and then also work that's being done to develop standards and governance, and then deploy that into really tangible things like training and education and skills development. And so that's kind of, we see ourselves transcending quite a few of these efforts, but I see them actually organically merging already, and recognizing that because AI is so many things in so many different places, we really need to kind of partner together and understand those implications. And so the presentation was shared. I know it was a PDF, so you might not be able to click on it, but I can share these links. And if you're interested in any of this information, most of it's available on our website. We're now at responsible.ai. And if you see in any of this work that it's called AI Global, we were recently have transitioned from AI Global to the Responsible AI Institute. So it's the same organization and the same work that we've been doing all along. So with that, happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you do need anything, you can reach us here. I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this time.